specialists with EPM Live. My contact information is in the lower right-hand corner here, and it'll be repeated at the end. If you attend the complete presentation, you'll be able to receive a copy of Project Publisher at no cost, and the instructions for that will follow in just a moment. I'm going to switch back off of slideshow mode because it looks like GoToWebinar is interfering with that. So the agenda today will be covering some introduction, some general background on work management, WorkEngine, and portfolio management and cost management, why cost management is important, what features are required in a PPM cost management system, and then we'll discuss some key takeaways. And if you have questions, please hold them till the end, and I'll be glad to answer them in any degree of detail you want. So the first thing I wanted to do is cover what are some of the things that executives are looking for overall in a PPM system. One of them is, how do we prioritize our projects and other efforts in the organization? Simple questions like, what is the status of our top 5 initiatives? Do we have the right people working on the right projects? Are we leveraging knowledge we gain on projects and other efforts and turning them into best practices? Do we have the skills and capacity and cost and budget within the organization to achieve our long-term goals? And can we still meet financial goals when things go wrong, as they always seem to? The bottom line is that serious portfolio management is not about accounting for what happened in the past. It's about helping to manage the future. So this next slide is showing a typical environment in most organizations, particularly in a matrix organization where projects are managed by project managers using people that actually report to line or resource managers. As you can see from this slide, the majority of work in most organizations that are IT-oriented or soft project-oriented, such as pharmaceutical or research and development, is actually in the operations and support area. These are the things that keep the organization running, that keep the lights on. Projects normally account for anywhere from 25 to 35% of the total effort in an organization. And most organizations today actually have more work than they can actually handle, and in between their annual or semi-annual budgeting cycles, they receive lots of new ideas, requests, proposals to do things, and so it's quite a different environment today than it was many years ago when major construction projects or engineering projects or aerospace projects, if they needed more resources or more money, they usually got it in order to achieve the end date. Today's environment is quite different. In order to manage and control in this environment, we believe you must have a complete inventory of all of the work. That includes the major projects, that includes operations, that includes any new initiatives that may or may not be approved. In essence, you can't just manage the projects because people are working on more than just major projects. Management also has to be able to prioritize all of the efforts against business objectives. And the business objectives may change due to market conditions, due to regulatory requirements. For the most part today, decisions are based on budget and resource capacity. And that's the real problem that most organizations face today. It's not getting any particular project done on time. It's what happens when new projects come along, when priorities change, what happens when people leave, what happens when we downsize.
Rich, can you please
a very important consideration is that even though tracking things in the past isn't the main objective, it does have an impact on the ability to meet future requirements. And so accurate tracking of actual costs against your budgets and resource plans is something that is required.
Rich, can you please switch to full presentation mode? We can't see the top of your screen.
Okay. I'll try again. It looks like GoToWebinar is interfering somehow.
Okay.
It does. So before I begin talking about the details of cost management, I just wanted to review the relationship as we see it between project management, program management, and portfolio management. Essentially, at the lowest level, you're dealing with the people in the organization, the processes that you have implemented, and the technologies that you have available to you. And project management is really about applying those three to be consistent and repeatable and deliver on them. Program management, as we see it, is really about integrated delivery. It's about making sure that when you have projects that relate to one another, that you're able to handle that situation in the organization and deliver such that you don't run into problems with dependencies between projects. And portfolio management at the highest level is really about aligning what you do and who works on things to meet the objectives that have been set up. Portfolio management is really about aligning all of the work in the organization with the goals and business drivers that the organization has. It's something that executives initiate and that everyone else in the organization, particularly senior management, is executing against. Notice that I've also drawn a line here that shows that collaboration, which is the ability to share all of the information on your projects, your resources, your operational efforts, the processes, and the technology, spans all of those. That's one of the reasons why PPM Live decided to build our system on top of Microsoft's SharePoint collaboration platform. Okay. So why is cost management important? Why isn't it enough to just do and meet the project schedules? The reasons are pretty simple. Organizations can have great schedule management but fail to meet their cost and financial goals. Another thing that we're seeing in many of our customer implementations is that differentiating capital and expense projects and capital and expense efforts is becoming more and more important. Another thing which most people don't usually consider when they're evaluating how to implement a PPM system, but which is actually a well-established fact, is that most major projects have budgets when they're approved or at some stage in the approval cycle long before they have detailed task schedules. This is one of the reasons why PPM tools that are based on project scheduling only are very difficult to implement. And we don't take that approach. As you'll see in a minute when I get to further slides, WorkEngine Enterprise allows you to actually do a budget on a project when it's just a proposal. In fact, because our whole concept is based on being able to apply WorkEngine Enterprise functionality to any SharePoint list, you could do a budget on a document, or a budget on a work request, or a budget on a ticket item in your help desk system if you wanted to do that. And you could do the same with a resource plan, as an example. The other thing is that resource management, as I said earlier, and since in most organizations the resources are the major portion of the cost, is really the main problem. Managers have to adjust to constantly changing priorities, new regulatory requirements, and that's the real problem. Basically, there's a lot of things happening at once, a lot of balls in the air, and therefore resource and cost management have become the major problems facing most organizations. Well, here's a simple test. When I give talks to PMO organizations, to PMI, to Microsoft Project Users Groups, I always like to point out this one statistic. Many years ago, and this study's been repeated several times, a simple test was designed for 100 C-level executives in major organizations that had major projects. And the questions, they were just asked 3 questions. How do you get data on your organization's finances, meaning your overall budget for your department, for example? How do you get data about your staff? And how do you get information on projects? Things like what's late, what's going over budget before it actually is over budget, and who's available to work on a new project. Surprisingly, the answer for the first 2 questions from almost all 100 CXO level staff was they go to some system, whether it's their finance and accounting system, whether it's their PeopleSoft HR system. But when they answered the question, which was totally free form, not multiple choice, on how they get information on projects, here's what 80 people said. I call the person I think knows the answer. 80 out of 100 people, CXO executives, said that. The reason is most organizations don't have a real enterprise system that they have a lot of confidence in for a project and cost and financial and resource management system. I'd like to point out that WorkEngine customers answered that question quite differently than these respondents. So what are some of the key features that we think are very key to the cost management and financial management aspects of a PPM system? The first is the ability to handle multiple types of costs. And here's what we mean by multiple types of costs. You need to be able to handle budgets or estimates. You need to be able to handle actual costs and actual man-hours. You may have a desire, and most organizations do, to handle forecast costs where you're updating and getting approval of revisions to your estimate or budget on a quarterly or in some cases even a monthly basis. There's also a special type of cost which is just related to how do I plan my resources. It's important to note that this type of cost type, as we define it, is different from the costs and the resource plans that are developed in your detailed project schedule. Those are bottom-up schedules. To us, the resource plans are top-down schedules, and it's important to keep them separate. A cost type which many people do not actually consider is the benefits. Most projects and most efforts are being undertaken because they have some cost benefit. It could be that the project's going to generate some revenue. It could be that it's also going to generate some savings. And it's important to actually keep track of that. Okay. Another key feature is that the system has to be compatible with your corporate accounting structure. We call that structure the cost category structure. And it starts out in very simple terms with your labor, the hardware, software, materials, and may include things like overhead and contingency. Another factor that we're seeing more and more often is the ability to differentiate capital and expense-related costs. One of the really critical elements, in our view, is that costs must be time-phased. Many people implement some sort of cost management system for their major projects where they're tracking the actual budget or the budget and the actual costs But if it's not a time-phased budget and you're not capturing data and budgeting it in a time-phased way, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, you really don't know that a project's over budget until it is. There's no real ability to forecast. So inherent in WorkEngine Enterprise is the fact that costs are always time-phased. Now, the time phasing in most organizations when they go through the implementation of our system is going to be different. So some examples. Your preliminary budget for any effort might be on a quarterly or annual basis, or it even might be a combination. It might be the current year in quarters and the next 3 years on an annual basis. The approved budget might be on a monthly basis, and we support both calendar months and any fiscal month cycle that you have. In the U.S., about 60% of the organizations in the United States use a 4-week, 5-week system where the months end on the Friday before the last Thursday. We support that. Actuals coming from a general ledger, if you're tracking that in the system, maybe on a monthly basis. Actuals from your timesheet system, where people are reporting what they worked on and what progress they've made. For most organizations, that's weekly, but we have seen situations where people have 2 reporting periods in a month, one that ends on the 15th, and one that ends on the last day of the month. We support all of those. And if you do forecasting, that could be on a monthly basis. And benefits, most often, benefits are handled on an annual basis. The other factor is that the system has to be able to handle the ability to translate your labor, your man hours, into costs. Okay, and as you'll see, I'll show you how we handle that in just a minute. Finally, some other points. Because most organizations are organized for their projects on a matrix environment where many of the people doing the work are not the resources that are exclusively for that project manager, the department managers and the resource managers and line managers in the organization want to be able to see and want to be able to budget their portion of project work. And so therefore, you want to be able to support doing budgets and doing any sort of cost tracking broken down for a project by divisions or departments. And another very critical element is the ability to evaluate various scenarios. Luckily for us and for vendors in the project and portfolio management field, projects don't always go according to schedule and stay within budget. So the ability to be able to handle what happens if I have a reduction in force, what happens if a major project is canceled, how can I best meet the needs of handling projects and operational efforts given various scenarios. The system has to be able to evaluate those sort of situations. And another important criteria is most organizations obviously have payroll systems, accounting systems, and other types of systems that are already tracking costs. Maybe they're not on a project basis, but they want to get to that point, and therefore it's important to be able to integrate with those systems to both feed them data and to receive data from them so that you don't have multiple data entry points. So the systems you might interface with are accounting, HR, a project scheduling system such as Microsoft Project or WorkEngine's work item planning tool. Simple tools like Microsoft Office. Most people want to see their data for cost in a spreadsheet format and want to analyze it in a tool like Microsoft Excel. And finally, the ability to have comprehensive viewing and reporting capability in both tabular and graphical forms, is a key component of any successful implementation of a project and portfolio management tool. I put the last point in script and in italic and in red because the best system in the world isn't going to be used if it's not easy to use and it's not basically in a format and a user interface that people in the organization who are going to use it feel comfortable with and feel that they're familiar with. And that's the reason, by the way, that WorkEngine was developed in a SharePoint environment, because SharePoint is the most widely used collaboration platform in the world right now. And if you understand an application that's been built in SharePoint, you're going to know how to use WorkEngine Enterprise because it's all very familiar and following the same pattern. So now we're going to discuss some of the more technical details, and I've included these slides simply as examples. We do deliver with WorkEngine Enterprise an enterprise template, which basically gives you a starting point for how to set up cost categories, cost types, views, reports, dashboards, etc. But almost certainly, most organizations are going to personalize that, in some way. So, just to explain, this is the administrative aspect. So this is something that is done usually once and maintained only when there are changes. But what this is saying is that we have a cost type called the budget, and it has components that are shown here in the checkboxes. So very simply, this is saying that the cost type called budget has a component called labor. Labor is broken down by in-house and subcontract. That's why those other boxes called DBA, developer, project manager, underneath in-house are not checked. Okay, and it also has categories called data center, servers, communications, software, etc. So this might be an example of a preliminary budget where all anybody is interested in is labor broken down by in-house and subcontract. Further down the line, there might be a requirement to have another cost type called approved budget or detailed budget, and that would have checkboxes for DBA, developer, project manager, system analyst, etc. Checked off. Okay. Once these cost categories and cost types have been set up, okay, they basically drive all of the rules as far as summarization, how the costs are being calculated, how they're being rated. The next basic component of the system is something called cost types. And here I've illustrated some cost types that are fairly typical for many organizations. Benefits is one cost type. It includes subcategories of savings and revenue. Estimate, which is very similar to the budget, is something that's entered, in a spreadsheet mode. There's a special cost type we support called MSP and work item work. Essentially what that does is as you create detailed project schedules in Microsoft Project or in our web-based work item planner, we will summarize all of those costs automatically for you and all of the resource requirements into a time phase cost type, in this case, which is called MSP and work item work. The names, by the way, mean nothing in particular. You can name them any way you want. There's another cost type called resource plans baseline. That's being generated automatically as people go through the resource planning and negotiation process. I've included here an example of a cost type SAP actuals that is being fed from SAP into WorkEngine using our Gateway API. And finally, a cost type called timesheet actuals, which is being generated automatically from the WorkEngine timesheet system. So let's see how somebody would actually use the system. This screen is showing the sort of starting point for most project-based work in WorkEngine Enterprise. And it's showing various projects, such as the office equipment tracking system, the general ledger, and I've highlighted there the Xbox DVD expansion project. Notice that the projects are also, and the efforts are also broken down by categories, such as proposed and active. And then under proposed, we have projects that are enhancement, other, and program-based projects. Under active, we have development and enhancement projects. All of those functionalities and all of those breakdowns, by the way, can be quickly personalized to suit your organization's requirements. But once I've highlighted the Xbox DVD project, if I wanted to maintain the budget or any other cost type that I wanted to view or enter data on that I was allowed to by the security model, all I do is go to the SharePoint ribbon and go to the item called Cost Planner and click it. And you'll see in a minute what happens when I do that. If I want to negotiate for resources on my project or establish resources on a project I completely control and set up a resource plan, I click on the Resource Planner. If I want to do some very sophisticated analysis that you would do in something like Excel pivot tables, I click on the Cost Type Analyzer, and I would be selecting usually multiple projects in that situation. And if I wanted to evaluate different scenarios, I would click on the Modeler tool in the ribbon. So for a moment, I'm going to pretend that I selected that project and I clicked on the Cost Planner. And this is what I would see. I would see the total budget. I see here that it's got a breakdown of capital and expense. I've got labor broken down by in-house and subcontract, hardware, software. One thing to point out is I'm showing here hours, man hours, so I have 200 man hours of in-house labor, which costs $10,000. As I refine that estimate, by the way, the rates for different types of labor could change, and therefore the cost totals will change, automatically. I can also do the estimates in headcount if I wish, or in percentage of a resource's time. Here's a situation. Earlier I mentioned that we want to be able to, one of the requirements that most organizations have is they have multiple organizations involved in the project, and they want to be able to break down the budget. So here I've highlighted the business analysts, and I get to choose the department. So I could have an entry for Development San Jose. I could have another entry for the Messaging Infrastructure group, and I could have another estimate for the Customer Service group. Okay. Another capability from a cost management standpoint that's really required by many organizations is the ability to have different rates for different groups, different types of projects. And that's what this screen is illustrating. Here, I am going to choose what rate of business analyst I'm going to use for this line of work. And again, I could have multiple lines. As you can see, this can get fairly complex. But the fact is, for most organizations, the budgeting process for projects and the budgeting process for the organizations is usually fairly complex. So I might have a line here for DBA SJ type of business analyst, and another one for Germany type of business analyst. Okay, all of these configuration options are basically configurable to suit your situation without writing code. The user interface for the administration is in fact SharePoint itself and the configuration options. So most customers do not have any sort of custom code involved in implementation. Perhaps the thing besides the configuration and editing data that is most important to the organization is how can I use the data? What can I see? And how can I tell in advance that things are going wrong, and what can I do about it? So I've just picked a couple of types of cost reports here, but this one in particular is very significant. It was designed for us with the help of one of the leading industry analysts in financial cost management and project portfolio management. And what she suggested is that it's extremely important to be able to compare the current budget in a time-phased fashion for a project, or the current resource plans, meaning the commitments that have been agreed to between the various managers for how much development time you're going to get, okay? And to compare that to what's coming out of the current schedule. So this situation here is actually fairly typical. Notice that I've got summary resource plans there, broken down by labor in-house and then underneath by developer and tester. And I've got the current resource plan is in red because I'm actually expending more man hours in the current project plan than was anticipated when I started this project. And that's highlighted. The important thing to understand about this particular view and why it's so critical is the fact that this is actually showing what's going to happen the minute every project plan is actually saved and published. So it's alerting people months in advance to where problems are going to exist due to a project slipping. And one thing to remember is that this view is available not just to project managers, this view is available to the line managers and executive in the organization. And it's basically going to alert them to problems early on so that they can do something about it. And they can take the corrective action that's necessary. And you may wonder why that particular thing was red, and I highlighted this and expanded it to show that the reason is quite simple. There was $2,112 of testing work that now is being scheduled in a month where there was none actually budgeted or none actually put into a resource plan. And so I might be actually able to see this months in advance and then realize that this isn't going to work. I don't have testers committed for this project in that period of time. Now I have to go back and find out what can be done about it. I may have to delay the project. I may have to ask for additional resources. I may have to go outside and get contractors to do the work. This is another what we call cost view in the system, and what this view is showing is it is very much a scorecard view of all of the projects and operational efforts in the organization. In this case, it's being broken down by what department is controlling the projects, and this is a combination view which is showing with colored cells on the left-hand side and overall weighted ranking prioritization. What are the most important projects in the organization? What are their scores? How do they contribute to business drivers like corporate image, cost reduction, employee morale, benefits, infrastructure, regulatory requirements, etc.? What stage they're at in the approval cycle. And on the right-hand side, I've got the time-phased budgets for all of those projects. Most of our customers find this to be a very critical view for management executive reporting, on a monthly or quarterly basis. This is a slide that I wish I could make interactive, but just to explain what it's doing, if I select all of the work in the organization or some combination of work, proposed work and active projects, and click on that modeler panel ribbon bar back in a couple of slides ago from the Project Center, this is what I see. At the top half of the screen, I see certain information, in this case that same weighted ranking prioritization view. I see all of the projects and operational efforts, and on the right-hand side I see a series of bars. At the bottom of the screen, I'm seeing how does this current lineup of work compare to the budgets that I have, okay? And where am I in trouble, okay? Obviously, I'm in trouble in labor with January and February. What I can do is I can cancel a project by simply unchecking it, as highlighted with the arrow there. I could move the project, okay, or move a series of projects, or stretch them out, which very often you might stretch out operational and support work and say, I'm only going to do this at 50%, of the effort I was planning in order to make way for some new project that comes along. And down at the bottom, I'm looking at either the manpower or, in this case, the cost management aspects of the projects. And I can evaluate multiple scenarios and save them. So I could say, and do an analysis as a PMO director, evaluate 3 possibilities for canceling projects, moving things, stretching out operational work, and then present this to senior management and ask them to make a decision. Or in that meeting with senior management, I could go in and pick up any of the scenarios I had saved and modify them so that they could see what some alternatives I didn't think of were. This is probably the part of WorkEngine Enterprise that has the most appeal to senior management, and many organizations have actually started out using just this tool to evaluate major workloads in the organization and basically to do project selection is what they call it. Now, I've just talked about the cost management functions and a little bit about some of the resource functions, modeling, budgeting, etc. But WorkEngine Enterprise, is a very comprehensive PPM system. It has dashboard capability. It has timesheet capability, overall work management capability, including its own scheduling, work item scheduler, and very comprehensive resource management capability, which I think Heather has a sign up for another webinar focusing just on the resource management aspects of the system. I think the beauty of the value proposition we offer to customers is that we have the same level of functionality that some of the major PPM players have. We just have it lower support cost, lower implementation time and cost, extremely tight integration with Microsoft Project and Office. We require only Microsoft SharePoint Foundation. We do not require the enterprise server version of SharePoint. And as you may be aware, SharePoint Foundation is a no-cost download for Windows Server. To get you started, we have enterprise templates and workspaces that can get you into production very quickly, and the system can be integrated with existing financial systems. So I mentioned early on that those of you who attend this webinar are entitled to get a free copy of our Microsoft Project Publisher system, which publishes Microsoft Project schedules to SharePoint. All you have to do is go to this link, www.projectpublisher.com, enter the promo code Ready to Rock, and anyone who has detailed questions, would like to hear more about any of the details of WorkEngine Enterprise and its cost management or any other capabilities, please feel free to contact me. My phone number and email are there. And I think, Heather, I'm going to open it up to questions now.
Perfect. I'm going to start unmuting the lines.
Thursday of the month all the way until the 10th. And then when that button goes away, they can't request.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
I think somebody else was on the phone as we were unmuting, so.
Oh.
Does anybody have any questions? So, Rich, I think we're getting some feedback from those on the line who don't know they've been unmuted. I have been addressing questions as we've been going through the webinar. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to send them over. Rich's email address is listed on the screen. And you can also send an email to info@epmlive.com. And I think we'll wrap it up from here, Rich.
Okay, thanks very much for everybody's attention.
I think they want to get off of